Well, thank you, Marilyn, for a very kind and gracious introduction. I have to say it's been a great pleasure over the last 7 or 8 months getting to know Marilyn. Marilyn is really, truly an extraordinary person. She has great capacity as a visionary and as a pragmatic leader in bringing new values and new perspective to business and leadership communities. It's also a great pleasure for me to be a member of the Table of Honor. And I have to assure you that that doesn't mean that all the rest of you are at the table of dishonor. It's wonderful as well to be so welcomed as a guest into this community, and so welcomed as a guest into the Royal Roads community as well. The leadership of Marilyn, particularly in bringing some of these ideas forward, is extraordinary, and the leadership of Alan Cahoon in terms of opening his intellectual community, and the leadership of Graydon and others at the Board of Trade in terms of opening their community, this community, to new ideas and new visions of the future really is genuinely extraordinary. It's very much my pleasure to speak with you this morning, and I want to take you on a bit of a journey. I want to engage with you, and I want to challenge you in a certain way to engage the world literally as it is, so that we can shape it into what it can be. And I want this morning to deliver one very, very simple message, and that's that values matter. They matter in science, they matter in politics, they matter in the arts, in humanities, in law, in business, in whatever domain we choose to classify human activity. Values matter, and matter a lot. They're absolutely central to how we see the world and to how we shape it. And whether it's from bench science to new forms of global governance, values matter not simply in economic terms or as catalysts of wealth creation. Our greatest wealth, and I'm going to put this to you now, and I hope that this will really be the center of our discussion over the course of the day. Our greatest wealth as human beings, and now as a global society of human beings, is the degree to which we can be more humane, more fair, more just in how we structure and function as a global society. We are imperfect as human beings, but in that imperfection, values can be absolutely revolutionary. And they can show us that hope, in fact, is not a fool's choice. In the context of global uncertainty and the new demands, if you will, that accrue for business leaders, there really is it's a crucial moment for recognizing that business is not separate from society. Business is not simply about extracting wealth. It's not simply about doing so and then giving back. It's not a separate entity. It's actually integral to the viability of society. And whether that's a national society or a global society, at this point, the convergence of multiple crises, whether it's a fuel crisis, a food crisis, an international financial crisis, climate crisis, population crisis, really demands that business reimagine its place in the kind of constellation of the architecture of our global political economy. And that really means, at least from my perspective, firmly rooting itself and its practice in a set of values that allow for healthy communities, not just today, but in the future, and that allow for communities to adapt, to be resilient, and to thrive in a fundamentally different way. And this really requires some deep, careful reflection on the part of business leaders and business communities in terms of how they see themselves, again, not as separate from society, but as part of society. Well, there are many signs of progress, and I think it's very easy to be overwhelmed and to, in a sense, throw one's hands up and fall back in despair at the complexity of the challenges that we face. But I think in the first instance, we need only look to history to see that as human beings, we in fact are capable of extraordinary things, of previously unimaginable initiatives that have a huge and significant impact. And so I think, for example, very simply, just in the last 200 years, the abolition of the slave trade, the abolition of the slave trade has been a fundamentally redefining movement that has, in its essence, it began with a reassertion of basic human values and an extension of those values to others, and not only an extension, but a demand that those values be extended where certain people and certain forces or actors within society refused. And so that's one very simple, concrete example. Another example is the emergence of labor rights, the emergence of women's rights, the emergence of children's rights, the emergence of the environmental movement, for example, the emergence of the global health movement, is particularly in the last 20 years or so, and as well the creation of the United Nations in the face of the two great wars of the last century, and as well the creation today of the International Criminal Court, however imperfect, and all of these things themselves are imperfect, but they're very much a movement in the right direction according to the right kind of value-based compass that we need to move towards. And I think more recently of very concrete examples around, for example, the convention to ban the use of landmines in warfare. I think of the International Treaty on Tobacco and Tobacco Control. I think of the fact that new forms of governance are emerging internationally, both formally and informally. And I think as well of new coalitions that are now forming nationally and internationally within the business community, within civil society, among governments, and that there is very much an ethos of pragmatism and at the same time a willingness to reimagine the value base that we hold as human beings. So on the one hand, it's very easy to be despairing, but I think one has to look at the world with a high degree of humility, see the world in a broader perspective, both historically and in terms of the future, and then make your choice about who you are going to be, both as an individual and who you are going to be as a business, who you're going to be as a government, who you're going to be as a civil society organization, and so on. And from that perspective of humility, broad historic and future-oriented perspective, insight is possible, wherein you can make that kind of clear value choice about how you are going to be in the world, so that you can make a serious, significant, and transformative change in the world. Yeah, I think Canada, as a nation, seriously undervalues its responsibility to engage the world in a meaningful way. Historically and comparatively speaking, we have one of the most successful societies in human history. We have a society that is based and practiced in the concept of cosmopolitanism, in the concept of inclusiveness, in the concept of respect, in the context, in the concept of engaged, pragmatic nation building and community building. We have enormous experience that is profoundly important today internationally. And I think it is vital for the world and for us as part of the world that we play a much more significant role internationally, that we re-engage in multilateralism, for example. In the last few years, we have stepped back. We need to re-engage and do so not simply from the perspective of the pursuit of self-interest, but from the perspective of the pursuit of common interest. Because only in recognizing the importance of common interest is it possible for an individual, whether it's a person or a nation, to actually thrive. We're at a point now, I believe, in human history where there is a complex interdependency that has never before existed to the degree that it exists today. We're a planet of 7 billion people today. We're a planet where issues like emerging and re-emerging infectious diseases, H1N1, SARS, for example, tuberculosis, HIV, these are global challenges. And they're global challenges of the common good. And the only way one can engage meaningfully, for example, to address those issues, is by taking a common good perspective. That's true for emerging infectious diseases. It's true for the international financial crisis. It's true for climate change. It's true for the energy crisis. It's true for the food security crisis that exists internationally. And it's true for any one of a number of other major policy domains. And Canada has, again, enormous experience with creating a society that can deal meaningfully and respectfully and inclusively and pragmatically with issues that are fundamental to the very being of a society and to the growth and prosperity of a society. We've achieved great things in this country. We have problems, we certainly do. But how we approach those problems is critical to the success of this nation. And how we approach the kind of problems that I've talked about internationally is critical to the success of our global community. I think when we think of leadership, often we think of a person who has a kind of a galvanizing vision. This is true to a certain extent, but there are other elements of leadership that are vital. There's no such thing as a leader without followers, and people do not follow what they do not believe. How do you come to a place where you create within your community the possibility of leadership, where you create the enabling environment where different people can lead at different times and in different ways? I think that one of the values that I've learned is very important to that process is humility, in fact. And it means humility from an individual perspective, but also from a community perspective in relationship to other communities. And it means, humility really means it's a perspective that allows you to see what you previously couldn't see because you're so clouded with your own self-interest or your own goals or whatever. It allows you to see, again, the broad sweep of history. It allows you to see the future, or that a future exists with or without you, right? And it allows you insight. It allows you to understand, to literally stand under what it is that you know, and to see it in a different way. And so from that perspective, with humility, you gain insight, you gain the possibility of a different vision, and you also gain a certain willingness, if you will, to listen to others, to engage others, and to hear what they're saying. And this, I think, is fundamental to leadership. Because people, again, there's no such thing as a leader, at least in a democratic sense. There certainly are leaders who don't have followers. But in a democratic conception, and particularly in a cosmopolitan democratic conception, leadership requires followers. And people will follow when they're heard, when they believe in what a person is offering or saying, when that offering comes from a process of dialogue, comes from a process of reflection, and in fact is a certain kind of manifestation or form making of a community perspective. So in order to do that, in order to be part of that process, perspective matters enormously. And a perspective of humility allows for you to see, and allows for you to formulate, and allows for you not only to enable your own self or your own ability to lead, but also to recognize when others are better at that particular moment, at that particular time, for that particular issue. And you will enable them to lead, and you will enable them to be the voice, if you will, or the vision or the expression of a particular community perspective.